Hello and welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi. Today we're talking about a subject we haven't really talked about on the channel too often, which is Panpsychism. Very, very interesting view. It's sort of all the buzz right now. We've got one of the premier philosophers defending this view, Philip Goff, joining us. And then contra Philip Goff, we've got Joshua Farris, who's recently written a book on a position called dualism in the philosophy of mind. And so what we're doing today is an informal debate between two philosophers on a really fun and philosophically interesting subject, panpsychism versus theism. What is the best account of consciousness as a fundamental explanation of reality? So as I mentioned, we've got sorry, look, Josh, I didn't know if you were paused. Both of you guys kind of looked paused for a second, but we're all good. So I did want to mention at the beginning of the stream, the two books. There's actually each of these guys written a book recently. Maybe put myself back full screen so I can show you guys. So from Farris, Dr. Farris, we've got The Creation of Self, which is a book defending dualism and also a very specific theory that he purports in this book, which is really cool. But it's a defense of dualism. And then we've got Dr. Philip Goff's book that was recently released. There we go. Got it on the screen. Why the Purpose of the Universe. He basically, Dr. Goff, and he's going to give a summary in just a few minutes of his book. He basically thinks that theists and atheists are wrong. We've got to find some sort of middle ground, and we're going to discuss all of that throughout the course of today's program. But that is part of what we're doing today, is talking about these two books. And I think it's just appropriate that we've got these two guys both released these books in philosophy of mind or related to philosophy of mind on the podcast in a dialogue together. I think this is actually one of the best ways to promote their work. So with that, what we're going to do, let me just give you a sort of rundown of what you can expect if you watch this entire video. So we're going to open with a 5-minute presentation from Dr. Goff on his book. And then we're going to pass it over to Dr. Farris, who's going to spend about 10 minutes talk about his book and then lay out some of the issues that he sees with this view, panpsychism, or at least Dr. Goff's version of panpsychism. And then after that, we're going to move into open dialogue. We've actually got that portion of the dialogue, of the debate, whatever you want to call it. We've got that partitioned into 3 different topics. We're going to spend about 20 minutes on each topic. We're going to do our best to stick to the 20-minute guidelines. We'll see how that does. But first section is, can panpsychism account for subjects? That's the first partition. Second partition is whether we need to ground consciousness in God. And then the third partition of the open dialogue section is the problem of evil. As I said, we're going to try to spend about 20 minutes on each of these. I've had enough experience with online dialogues like this to know that we're probably not going to get exact to 20 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. And then after that, we're going to do some Q&A with the live audience that has joined us. If you guys have any questions, then you can leave them in the live chat throughout the dialogue, throughout the debate, and then toward the end of the show, we'll get to those questions. So with that, let's go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Philip Goff, and let's get his sort of opening comments on his book. We'll pass it to Dr. Farris.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Cameron. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on Capturing Christianity. So I think so many people in these circles especially feel you have to fit into this dichotomy of either do you believe in the God of traditional Western religion, or are you a secular atheist? You know, it's like, whose side are you on, Richard Dawkins or the Pope? You got to decide. And I was raised Catholic, actually, but decided I didn't believe in God when I was about 14 and was quite happily in team secular atheist for many, many years. But just, I was quite happy with that. It wasn't like I had some God-shaped hole I needed to fill, at least as much as I was aware of. But just the last 5 years or so, I've just started to think that actually both of these worldviews are inadequate. Both of them have things they can't explain about reality. In terms of theism, it's the classic problem of reconciling a loving, all-powerful God with the terrible suffering we find in the world. So I think the theist has problems explaining suffering. In terms of traditional atheism, by which I mean a belief in a meaningless, purposeless universe, I think that struggles to explain the fine-tuning of physics. You know, I think as a society, we're really in denial about fine-tuning at the moment. I think it's a little bit like in the 16th century when we started getting evidence that we're not in the center of the universe, and people struggled to accept that because it didn't fit with the picture of reality they got used to. And nowadays we tend to scoff at those people, say, oh, stupid religious people, why didn't they just follow the evidence? But I think every generation absorbs a worldview they can't see beyond, and I think that's really what's going on with fine-tuning at the moment. So so that's one issue. Also the other issue I think secular atheism struggles to deal with is consciousness. I'm focusing particularly on an underexplored, really important issue, I think, that's just starting to emerge, revolving around making sense of the evolution of consciousness. Because natural selection just cares about behavior, right? It's only behavior that matters for survival. And with rapid increase in robotics and AI, it's become clear that you can have incredibly complex information processing and behavior without any kind of inner life or consciousness at all. So the question is, what natural selection could have made, it seems, survival mechanisms, very complicated biological robots that mechanically track features of their environment and initiate survival conducive behavior without having any kind of subjective experience. For any behavior associated with consciousness that's good for survival, it seems that we could have a mechanism that performs the same function without any consciousness. So why did consciousness evolve at all? I think this is a very deep difficulty. It's related to the issue of psychophysical harmony that I know, Cameron, you've had people on discussing before. So really, I've just come to think that, yeah, both of these views have things they can't explain, and we need to find a worldview that can account for all of these things. So I explore a range of hypotheses, including but not limited to cosmopsychism, the view that the universe itself is a conscious mind with its own goals. And all of these, what I'm trying to do is make sense of cosmic purpose or goal directedness, but in the absence of the traditional God. That's really the project. I think we have evidence for some kind of cosmic purpose, but we also have evidence against the traditional God. So we need to try and somehow make sense of cosmic purpose without God, and I think there are ways of doing that. So most of the book is just building a case for that, but then in the final chapter, I explore the connections to human meaning and purpose. So I hope there's things for both theists and atheists. I think on either side, you'll find hopefully good arguments to support your position. I do just want to say, actually, I do really deep dive on the fine tuning, consider all the objections that have ever emerged. I hope it's one of the most accessible introductions to Bayesian reasoning, but also you'll find things that challenge, which is always a good thing. Just finally, so my first book was an academic book. My second book was aimed at general audience. This book, I'm trying to do both. So each chapter has a more accessible introductory bit and then a digging deeper bit, which gets into some of the more technical details. So I hope it kind of adds to the discussion. It's actually on sale on Thursday, November the 9th. But you can pre-order now and it will arrive very soon. So I'm hoping it adds to the discussion.
Yeah, that's November 9th, 2023 for anyone who is watching this in the future. If you're watching this, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10, 15, 20 years in the future. This is in the year 2023 that this is going on sale, but I'm sure that there will be more sales. But let me put this back up on the screen real quick. So this is the book, Why? Let me see if I can get it here. The Purpose of the Universe by Dr. Philip Goff. One thing I really like about this book, my background's in photography and graphic design and everything. I really like the cover of this. It's really beautiful, really good picture that they chose there for this tree growing up in the middle of the library. Really cool stuff. All right, let's get into Dr. Farris's opening statement, again, about 10 minutes long. He's going to talk about his book. Then he's going to lay out some of his the problems that he sees with Dr. Goff's proposal that he gives in his book, and that will be the topic for today. Is theism a better explanation of consciousness, fundamental reality, or is panpsychism, some version of panpsychism, a better explanation? So, Dr. Farris, feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Philip, for having this discussion. We have this verses. It sounds so competitive, but I think we're just going to have a nice discussion. We'll see how it goes, right? So I really appreciate this. I appreciate Goff's time and his investment in research. I found his works to be quite useful, helpful analytically. He's quite provocative as well. He offers a variety of thoughtful criticisms, both to physicalism as well as dualism, that should be considered at least, as well as to theism, especially in his latest book, Why, where he's providing an even bigger kind of picture of meaning, morality, purpose, value, these sorts of issues that are relevant and often put forward as advantageous in a sort of theistic worldview, a theistic frame. And but I'm defending sort of the view in my book, The Creation of Self, defending the view of dualism, that there are two robust or two distinct independent types of substances, both soul and body, and that these are naturally compatible with theism. And there's a whole history and heritage behind it, motivating it. This is why it's often been called something like theistic dualism. I make a more specific objection to the sorts of views, naturalistic views on offer that are out there. And then I provide a more thorough argument for a dualism and my particular brand of dualism that demands a kind of theism. So Goff defends a kind of panpsychism that he calls cosmopsychism, really kind of influenced by, you might say, his father, Bertrand Russell. It's a kind of view that he puts forward as compatible with the practice of science, some kind of narrowly construed or commonly construed view of science. His view is naturalistic explicitly in both of his recent books, and secular. And while he remains open to theism, his view doesn't require it, according to his statements. Theism doesn't, in fact, do any sort of explanatory work for him, it seems. It seems to him, in his, especially more pointedly in his recent work, Why, we can get all that we need on this sort of cosmopsychist view. Again, I'm thankful for his work. I'm thankful for panpsychism. In the history of analytic philosophy, panpsychism has opened up discussions to put dualism back on the table for consideration, because Goff and his colleagues who are defending some version of panpsychism take seriously the mind. They take seriously phenomenal consciousness, what it is like to experience. And they also take serious knowledge that can be gained through introspection. And I think that's to be congratulated. And that's a great thing. I think that's an improvement upon the materialists of the early 1900s leading into the mid 1900s. Materialism seems to be going out of fashion. And in one way, panpsychism has helped with that, I think. In many ways, the problems that have been raised were already dealt with in many ways by the father of dualism, René Descartes. He was dealing with very similar issues of his day, and the solutions that are being provided are looking strikingly more and more like Descartes' view. But his version of panpsychism is a monist version. And arguably, he's a kind of property dualist. That's Goff, that is. In that he believes that there are mental events as well as physical events. This raises the question about what it is at the foundation of reality and how it is that we account for that. And that's a concern that I and other dualists and other theists have with panpsychism. I'm dubious that it's a sufficient ground for subjects, and particularly how subjects relate to the world as subjects of consciousness. So he puts forward two prevailing paradigms, and I think this is basically right. This is commonly how it's put forward in the literature. There's, broadly speaking, dualism, following Rene Descartes, um, rightly. There's materialism. And then now there's this kind of third, via media, panpsychism, or some version of panpsychism. But there's these common claims that are made throughout Galileo's era, as well as the more recent book, Why, as well as on podcasts, that panpsychism is just the simpler view. It's simpler than dualism. But that's really irrelevant if panpsychism just doesn't have the explanatory power. It doesn't have all the virtues that's needed to explain all the data related to the subject, namely the unity of consciousness, metaphysical simplicity, and arguably following from that some kind of primitive particularity of persons and minds, persons as immaterial substances. The other virtue that's posited, according to Goff and other panpsychists, is that it's simpler. It provides a better explanation of psychophysical laws and how these things are arranged and governed. But I don't think that's right. Panpsychism, like dualism or other property dualism, requires some sort of bridge explanation or paradigm explanation itself in order to make sense of both mental events and physical events, because these are not obviously one and the same thing. They are distinct types of thing, and the dualist fully recognizes that they are distinct types of things that must be grounded in some way. So it's questionable as whether or not it has the explanatory power necessary, or at least the explanatory power that dualists provide. Furthermore, there's the advantage often posited that it's a form of naturalism, if you think that's an advantage. It has the advantages of being more scientific in that it includes qualities that we can actually study. We can actually study consciousness, and we can have some kind of science of consciousness. However, in the recent promise between Christopher Koch and David Chalmers, it doesn't seem that we've really made any progress, neither the materialist nor the panpsychist. Now, you might say, well, we need more time. But like the materialist, these seem to be just promissory notes once again. In fact, in recent discussions online, there was an article put out by Nature that IIT, the information theory, which is commonly associated with panpsychism, as a way to make sense of a neuroscience of consciousness, can do the work that we need. It can provide the sort of research program to make sense of consciousness. But it's dubious that it will. It's dubious that IAT will do the work that we, or panpsychists, think that it will do. In fact, many neuroscientists have called it pseudoscience recently, and they've provided a statement as such. But the dualist defending a sort of radical, sort of substantive difference between consciousness and physical events would expect this. It's not that surprising. We're not surprised. The real elephant in the room in recent online discussions is that theistic dualism, theism in general, dualism more generally as well, really is the elephant in the room. Panpsychism has gotten a lot of attention as of late. It's kind of trendy right now. Theistic dualism, though, seems to provide a better explanation. Panpsychism is coming out of its own naturalistic history, naturalistic narrative, and it seems to be the kind of final frontier for the naturalist and the secularist who want to give no place to theism as an explanation of consciousness. But in the end, I think it's going to look probably more like, once again, the promissory notes of the materialists. But what does Goff advance? Because we want to have more particular discussions about Goff's panpsychism. I'm going to put this out there, and we can clarify and discuss further what's in the book and the position that he offers, because it's quite nuanced and quite interesting. Obviously, he rejects variant materialisms on the mind-body relation. That's great. He gives some credence to the empirical sciences, more so than dualists. He affirms a form of property dualism where there are physical events and mental events. His views, or broadly his views, are consistent, it seems, both with reductive panpsychism as well as emergent panpsychism. However, he leans in the latter direction. He affirms a kind of pan-proto-agentialism with dispositional properties. He is monist, but there's this underlying question: what is the substance that underlies this these two types of events? What is the substance? It's not a form of cosmic idealism where you have this underlying substantial reality or this metaphysical ground, this non-causal, a set of non-causal, or I should say, necessary, metaphysically necessary facts that ground contingent facts. But it's close to something like cosmic idealism, and I would suggest he probably should move in that direction. It's a form of non-identity constitutive cosmopsychism, where there are multiple subjects not identical to the cosmic subject as experiential parts of the cosmic subject or subsumed in the cosmic subject. He affirms a form of libertarian freedom, or is at least open to it. It's unclear what kind of libertarian freedom could fit or situate in his view. What about the afterlife? He says something about this in the recent books, particularly Galileo's Error. And he says, well, possibly if we include some form of mysticism, but we deny some sort of traditional sense in which we could literally persist in the next life as the self-same, enduring subject of consciousness. Something like what Christianity provides, or theism more broadly. But I think the evidence for such a view is suspect, and the evidence for a sort of Christian view that we literally survive is stronger. So panpsychism is it's not only a strange view in general, in that it posits entities that generally create a kind of muddy middle, or often obfuscate the nature of consciousness as a kind of, as a subject of consciousness. Panpsychism, and Goff's panpsychism in particular, affirms a kind of causal closure, which many see as an advantage, kind of causal exclusion. But the nature of subjects and subjectivity seems to me, at least in many other dualists as well as theists, to be more than just phenomenality or a phenomenal experience. The nature of what it means to be a subject of consciousness seems to be richer than that. The analog we have of minds don't seem to comport with the variant panpsychisms, in particular cosmopsychism. So those are some of my concerns, upfront general concerns, that will help us explore the position as well as the more recent book. And more particularly, those are some of the concerns I have with how it is that panpsychists understand the nature of the subject of consciousness. And so I think we can kind of open it up from there and discuss further particulars.
Okay, so unfortunately, Philip was while Joshua was. Yeah, you look back, but unfortunately, Philip lost connection several times during Dr. Farris's opening there. So,
I got to say it all over again. Are you kidding?
You gotta say everything over. No, let's do this. Let's have we'll turn it over to open dialogue as we originally planned, but let's have Philip give us what he believes is Dr. Farris's objection to panpsychism. We're going to shift to that first partition, which is, can panpsychism account for subjects? We'll get Philip to recount what that objection is. We'll get Farris to clarify or maybe correct anything, and then we'll move into open dialogue for that portion. Let's try that, see how that goes, and if anything needs to be clarified, we can do that along the way.
Good, thanks. So everything seems to be going wrong today. We don't normally have internet problems, but we've restarted the internet. Hopefully it should be all right now. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I do struggle to see why exactly a panpsychist can't be incredibly robust about both consciousness, the properties or characteristics of consciousness, as well as subjects of experience, the things that are the bearers of consciousness. It's true when we're articulating the problems with physicalism that we both disagree with. We tend to talk about the qualities or characteristics of consciousness, what it's like to see color, what it's like to hear sound, these qualities that can't be captured in the purely quantitative vocabulary of physical science. And so it might sound like, oh, well, we just believe in these bundles of properties, consciousness properties, rather than a solid, robust bearer of those qualities. But and some panpsychists do think that, right? Some panpsychists
Mhm.
have a bundle theory of the self, reminiscent of David Hume's bundle theory of self, which is just Hume thought our minds are just collections of ideas. But many panpsychists think, myself included, I'm more inclined in this direction, that as well as the properties of conscious experience, there is also the bearer of those properties. Now that is the brain, but the brain is a physical, robust entity. And so I suppose I'd want to hear more about what is the difficulty with thinking of the brain as the subject, as the bearer of consciousness. Just to be clear, for a panpsychist, the, the mind is the brain, but there's more to the brain than what physical science reveals about it. This is why it's a kind of middle way between dualism on the one hand, that consciousness and the mind are non-physical, and on the other hand, the physicalist or materialist position that it's all just brain chemistry. The panpsychist thinks there's just the brain, but there's more to the brain than physical science tells us about, because physical science, and this was the influence of Bertrand Russell in the 1920s, physical science just tells us what stuff does. You know, what the brain does, what bits of the brain does, going right down to basic physics. You just get kind of mathematical structure. It doesn't tell us, physics doesn't tell us, as Stephen Hawking put it, what breathes fire into the equations. For the panpsychist, it's consciousness that breathes fire into the equations. It's consciousness that underlies all that mathematical structure you get from physics. So, yeah, I think I heard, I was coming in and out, I think I heard Josh say panpsychists believe in mental and physical properties in a sense, but actually we think at the fundamental level, it's not dualism. It's not that there's mental and physical stuff. At the fundamental level, there's just consciousness and things that have consciousness. So there might be networks of very simple conscious entities interacting in simple, predictable ways. Through their interactions, they realize certain patterns, certain mathematical structures. And then the thought is, those mathematical structures just are what we call physics. So you sort of get physics out of underlying facts about mind or consciousness. So that's why I think it's a very simple, elegant, parsimonious view. We accommodate everything about reality just in this single kind of stuff, mental things with mental properties. Everything bottoms out in that. But yeah, so given that qualification that there's more to the brain, there's more to the metaphysical reality of the brain than what physical science tells us about, why can't a panpsychist just say, there are subjects, the brain is the subject, the brain is the bearer of consciousness?
Yeah. So,
Thanks very much, Josh. Thanks so much. I didn't say because of all the stress. Thank you so much for taking the time to consider my work. I've been really provoked by things you've written, and I'm sad I didn't hear what you just said, but I'm sure it was also
no, I
thought
appreciate
provoking.
it. That's
I
all
look
right.
forward to
Yeah.
hearing the
Well,
recording.
I said, yeah. So I said quite a bit, but Will, let's jump into this a bit more. Yeah. I mean, where to begin with this? Yeah. I appreciate the fact that panpsychism, as you offer it, especially, offers a richer view of physical reality, right? And so, based upon that, why can't we have something like a richer physical substance that's not articulate, or that's not that doesn't have the sort of a say that would be given by a physicalist, right? You can say more than the physicalist because the underlying stuff, substance, whatever it is, is richer than what the physicalist has to offer, right? Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think there does seem to be a problem here with there seem to be a few problems. And analogically, I don't see how or why we should ever take it that atoms, as the original question is raised, or even particles, more fundamentally, particles have the kinds of have consciousness at all. Not only does it seem bizarre, which is a common claim that's put forward against panpsychism, I don't have any reason to believe that particles are actually conscious, for one thing. Um, uh, but uh, but that's one question. Why should I actually believe this? I mean, I think it's one thing to put forward that there is some sort of underlying substance that is richer, that provides a sort of ground for phenomenal experiences and things of that sort, which I'm appreciative of. But that seems to me better suited in a broader sort of idealist paradigm rather than the sort of panpsychist paradigm that at least carries the same sort of structure or frame as the physicalist, as you've put it something like that in several different places, which you see as an advantage, and an advantage to how we think about the nature of science and what science can actually give us. So there's a big question there why we have any evidence at all to actually think that particles could ever be or are in fact conscious. The other question is why, when we have respectable ontological options on offer, why we should take this sort of neutral monism, because it does seem like at some fundamental level you are affirming some kind of neutral monism like Russell. Uh, it's it that's the way it seems, at least on the surface, based upon what you said. But I don't see any reason why anyone should accept that. It seems, once again, like a kind of muddy middle position that obfuscates between the nature of consciousness itself and physical properties, which I take epistemically, I take phenomenal properties to be fundamental and, at least epistemically, prior to any knowledge about the physical, which wouldn't seem to comport certainly with the kind of scientific frame or the generally sort of compatible physicalist frame that's on offer in the kind of panpsychism that seems to be put forward here. Um, I'm quite convinced by someone like Richard Firmerton, who says that we have the only way that we know about physical things, physical events, is by way of phenomenal properties themselves. Phenomenal properties provide the epistemic foundation for knowing anything at all, and we only know physical things by derivation or by mediation from our phenomenal states of consciousness, where phenomenal states of consciousness actually provide the means by which we know ourselves and the world around us. But if that's the case, it doesn't seem to provide a sort of picture that would give credence to the scientific method as saying much of anything at all about phenomenal consciousness, because phenomenal consciousness is prior epistemically. So maybe I should just put those two issues out there.
Yeah, I'd like to get Philip's response to this. This is not the first time he's heard the objection that panpsychism is hard to believe, I suppose is one way to put one of the things that you said, Josh.
Well,
it just
yes,
seems, yeah, it just seems.
Yeah, I recognize that. I was saying more so that analogically, I don't have reason to believe it.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, different things are strange or less strange in different cultural contexts in lots of societies throughout history, and throughout much of the Western Enlightenment, panpsychism was not so much a bizarre position. But sure, Josh is asking why believe it. Well, look, I think the way I see it is we've got this core philosophical issue at the basis of this, the mind-body problem, which is how do we fit together consciousness and the physical world into a single unified theory of reality, right? We know they both exist, We know about the physical world through our senses. I agree with Josh, it's kind of indirect, but that's an epistemological point that needn't have any metaphysical implications. We know about the physical world through our senses. We know about consciousness. By being conscious, you're just immediately aware of your own experience. How do you fit them together? The physicalist says the physical world is fundamental as physics describes it, and we reduce consciousness to that. That's quite a simple theory. The panpsychist tries to do it the other way around and says, well, no, certain facts about consciousness are fundamental, and the physical world sort of emerges from more fundamental facts about mind or consciousness. The dualist says both are fundamental. Both mind and the physical world are fundamental but distinct. So I think, I mean, all things being equal, we should try to go for a simpler hypotheses. We should try and respect Occam's razor. So if we can go for the monistic hypotheses of either physicalism or panpsychism, that's better than dualism because we've got a simpler view, if it's possible, unless there's some big problem with a non-dualist position. I think the problem with physicalism is that it just can't deliver the goods. You cannot. I think there are really good, well, for start, we've been trying for many decades to explain consciousness in terms of physical processes in the brain, and we've got absolutely nowhere. It's not that we haven't got the complete story. We haven't managed to explain a single physical process in the brain. Anyway, Josh and I probably agree on this. I think there are good philosophical arguments that that's just not a coherent project. Panpsychism can be done. Not only is this a viable project, we know how to make sense of it. This is the Bertrand Russell inspiration. We know how to make sense of the physical world emerging from underlying facts about consciousness. So we know it can be done. So we got physicalism. No one's ever managed to make sense of it. It's of dubious coherence. Panpsychism, it's a done deal. So I would say there's a default preference for panpsychism over dualism because it's just a simpler theory of reality. So I want Josh to tell me, ideally, what is I think the onus is on the dualist to say why we should go for the less simple view. And I thought it was supposed to be something like with, the panpsychist can't make sense of subjects. But again, why can't the panpsychist just say the brain is the subject? So yes, I suppose that's my core view, that we want to go for the simplest view, and panpsychism is simpler than dualism.
Yeah, so I think I think the line is that you've made or you've put forward that it's simpler is clear. I don't know that the onus is actually on the dualist if in fact I mean, panpsychism is kind of the new kid on the block to some extent. I mean, you obviously Bertrand Russell was affirming something like this, right? But panpsychism is kind of the new kid on the block. I mean, you don't have a lot of history behind panpsychism, a lot of supporters of panpsychism historically. So at least
Hold on, that's not quite true. I mean, Leibniz, Spinoza, these big Enlightenment Western philosophers were panpsychists. In 19th century, had something of a heyday. It was the dominant position in much of science and philosophy. It's only really the latter part of the 20th century that panpsychism falls out of favor, largely because of the materialist orthodoxy. David Scarabina's got a good book arguing that many of the big figures in Western philosophy were panpsychists, and obviously Eastern philosophy. So yeah, I don't think that's true.
Well, I think that's debatable. I mean, if Leibniz is a panpsychist, well, I mean, I think he affirms some kind of immaterial substance at the fundamental level. I would consider him more of an idealist. But I'd be happy if you came over to an idealist sort of a frame where there is some sort of cosmic subject or cosmic mind that underlies and makes sense of the contingent consciousnesses that exists in the world or come into existence in the world. I mean, I think I would be a much happier with that sort of view than the sort of panpsychism that posits these sort of underlying brutes that consciousness exists. Particles are conscious. In the how do you put it? Conscious.
In a
in the
very
stream
simple,
of
rudimentary
consciousness.
sense.
What's that? What's that?
In a just they're conscious in a very rudimentary sense is what I would normally say.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think okay, we'll get into this. I think we'll get into this more when we talk about theism. I don't feel either the onus or the pressure that the dualist is actually really the more complex view. Only insofar as, I think you can only say that insofar as there are two entities that are being put forward. But I think if if what needs explaining is an underlying set of data about phenomenal consciousness, as well as uh, 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 the nature of the identity of the self. Um, I think we need something like basic subjects of consciousness, but I don't see how we get that on panpsychism unless we have
Why is
pure,
that? Could we hone
pure
into that?
immaterial substances.
Why do you Oh, sorry. I think maybe there's a bit of a delay. But why can't the panpsychists make sense of subjects? Why can't they just say particles are subjects, brains are subjects? What is
Well, because we know that
wrong with
those
that?
things are not metaphysically simple, for one thing, and we have direct awareness of our own conscious states that seem to suggest that there is something that is metaphysically simple that is undergirding as the ground, the instantiator of these experiential items, these thought items. I mean, the just to spell out the kind of analog a bit more, I don't have an analogy for given my consciousness for thinking that underlying particles are conscious in any way that's similar to my consciousness. It's a pure theoretical posit to make sense of some sort of naturalistic story about how consciousness is related to the cosmos. I don't have any reason to actually believe that, but part of that has to do with the fact that there are certain facts that I have access to as a conscious person, as a subject of consciousness, that that um, that that do not provide a sort of analogy for thinking about particles themselves. Everything that we seem to know about particles themselves are given to us by the public properties that we can investigate and public
Well, but
properties that we seem to have access to by way of
that's the
science. But that
so I mean,
so the
yeah,
panpsychist is actually complicating the scientific picture, I think, in one way.
I mean, this is all that we know about anything empirically. A human being,
Mm.
all we have access to is their observable behavior. A human being has very, very complicated observable behavior corresponding to their very complicated consciousness. But a sheep has a simpler behavior corresponding to its simpler consciousness. A snail has simpler behavior corresponding to its much simpler consciousness. So for the panpsychist, this keeps going down with simpler and simpler forms of life having simpler and simpler forms of consciousness right down to the fundamental level. And I don't see any conceptual limit essentially to cut that process, that continuum off. But actually, Josh, maybe we don't disagree so much, because although I often characterize panpsychism in terms of conscious particles, many theoretical physicists are more inclined to think that that our reality is not made up of little particles, but of universe-wide fields. This fits better, for example, with quantum field theory and quantum entanglement and so on. So if you combine that view with panpsychism, the view would be that the fundamental forms of consciousness are the inherent nature of these universe-wide fields, and that the fundamental mind is the bearer of those fields, namely the conscious universe itself. So, I mean, I suppose here would be the question. So, what if you think there is a sort of idealist mind where there is, sorry, an idealist view where there is a conscious mind underlying all things? I'm inclined to that view as well. I would just identify that conscious mind with the universe itself. And again, you get a more parsimonious view. So, why believe in a fundamental mind outside of the universe as well as the universe if we can just identify the this fundamental mind, maybe the mind that fine-tunes itself, as I explore in my book, with the consciousness, with the cosmos itself. And you might say, well, nothing in science tells us it's conscious, but science is just maths, right? Physics is just equations. As Hawking powerfully said, it doesn't really tell us what's going on metaphysically. It just gives us this bunch of equations. So as far as physics is concerned, the universe could turn out to be anything as long as it has the right mathematical structure. So there's a sort of huge hole in our standard scientific story of the universe. The panpsychist or the cosmopsychist sticks a conscious mind in that hole. So at the base, there is this complex conscious mind with very complicated experience and realizing certain patterns, certain mathematical structures in that complex experience. And that those mathematical structures just are what physicists and cosmologists study. So yeah, so I'm still not understanding. So it's still, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't go for the yeah, sorry, I'll stop.
Well, I was just going to say, I wasn't sure if I heard, maybe you did address it and I just missed it. But one of the things that Dr. Farris said in response with respect to, I'm trying to get back to the topic about whether or not panpsychism can account for subjects. You said that the location of the subject is in the brain. And then Farris said, well, brains are not simple. They're not like simple, it's not like a particle. A brain is a, it's a very complex structure. So did you respond to that in what you just said, or did I miss it?
No, I guess there's lots of different, we're going from lots of different points, aren't we? So just to address that directly, well, I would say two things. Actually, there's a big divide in the panpsychist research community. You get some panpsychists who are very reductionist. The philosopher Luke Roelofs is perhaps a leading figure here, who want to say, really, there's just conscious particles, and what we call Cameron's mind is just a label for a complex combination of conscious particles. I'm increasingly skeptical of that view. For reasons I articulate in my book to do with the evolution of consciousness. And I've got an article in Scientific American out today, actually pushing this point.
Saw that.
So you also have non-reductionist forms of panpsychism, where the conscious particles, where consciousness sort of comes in layers, right? So you've got consciousness at the level of particles, new forms of consciousness at the level of molecules, at the level of the brain. And these new forms of consciousness come with new entities, with new causal dynamics, new forms of behavior. So again, on this non-reductionist view, you would have these very robust, in a sense, irreducible kind of new entities. Are they simple? Well, I don't know. I mean, they're not simple in the sense that they're very complicated. They even have parts. So I guess I'm skeptical that there's any good philosophical argument that the mind doesn't have parts. I think the mind seems to have parts. It seems to be very complicated. But I think there are pretty persuasive arguments that the mind is maybe in some sense irreducible. But still, the panpsychist can accept that. If you're this kind of non-reductionist panpsychist, you can accept that the mind is the brain, but the mind-brain is some radically irreducible entity.
Yeah, I think you can maybe you can get irreducibility of the subject. It's not clear what the actual subject is still, though. I mean, if the subject is this sort of complex brain that has these teleological properties that sort of unify it in some way, then we still have something that really is akin to materialism in a problematic way that seems to defy...
Why problematic? Why problematic? Why problematic?
Well, it seems to defy this sort of unity of consciousness that seems that we are so... that we're both in agreement with in terms of how we phenomenologically experience our own conscious states of awareness.
But Josh, is that really a problem if we've got this non-reductionist panpsychism where we've got these new irreducible entities emerging? And I mean, as I talk about in my Scientific American article, there's certain movements in different bits of science opposing the reductionist view of science, like the assembly theory by Lee Cronin and Sarah Walker, like Kevin Mitchell's defending sort of emergentism and libertarian free will in a physicalist paradigm. So I think it's something of a dogma, this very reductionist conception of science. And you can be a panpsychist where you do think there are these radically irreducible unified entities popping up at greater levels of complexity. And so why can't we make sense of a subject, a unity of consciousness? Yeah, I don't see why.
Philip,
Yeah.
do you mind if I not to go completely off topic, this is not off topic, but so recently on the show, there's a recent movie that came out called After Death. Have you guys heard of it? It's in the theaters right now. I did a couple shows on it, did one with the director, but it's about near-death experiences.
I was going to get to near-death experiences later.
Oh, you were?
Go
Okay.
ahead. I mean, if you want to. That was going to be a final sort of move at the end. Yes. But,
okay.
if you want to ruin it, I guess you can.
Well, the reason why, the thing that got me thinking about that was when Philip says, well, we can just identify the subject with the brain. And then my immediate thought that came up was, well, we have these near-death experiences where these people recount, out of body experiences. They've seen things in the operating room that can be verified by, third parties and everything. And so that would seem to provide some counter evidence to that idea that that consciousness can be identified with, some sort of physical brain or something like that. This is an area I know that not everyone has researched, so I don't want to put Philip on the spot here if this is not.
I think that's further buttressing evidence of the fact that panpsychism probably doesn't have the explanatory power to make sense of the richness of the kind of unity of consciousness that we do have that's dependent upon something like a metaphysical simple, of which brains just are not. And we know enough about brains, and we know enough, even first order, logically prior, we know enough about our own consciousness that doesn't seem to provide a sufficient analog for brains being the kinds of things that themselves are conscious. But I think the near-death experiences really should just take us out of naturalism altogether. That was going to be a larger discussion that I was hoping to have.
Actually, this might be a good time to transition to the second partition of the discussion period, which is whether or not we need to ground consciousness in God. So let's move to that. Obviously, we'll start with Philip to get his response to anything that was just said, and then we'll move into that.
So look, yeah, I would agree that near-death experience, if there is evidence that the mind, well, it's a bit tricky. There are actually Christian physicalists like Peter van Inwagen who believe in life after death in a physical sense. But putting that on one side, I guess I would agree out-of-body experiences are evidence for dualism. I mean, this is getting into thorny empirical issues rather than philosophical issues. I guess my issue with this is like, how do these, even supposing there's this immaterial soul that leaves the body, how does it see without eyes? How does it remember without a brain? And if we can see without eyes, why did we evolve eyes? I don't know. There's all sorts of things that I struggle to make sense of here. And books on this tend to just give the empirical evidence and don't go into, trying to actually make robust metaphysical sense of these concerns. Like, Descartes thought you couldn't remember or see without a brain. So I do have those worries. But I agree. Yeah, it potentially would be empirical evidence against panpsychism.
Well, I mean, yeah, what do we say to that? I think it is. I think it's strong evidence against panpsychism in the sense that, we've had near-death experiences for much of history. Now we've been able to document them a bit more because of the advance of science. We've been able to document at least when brain death seems to occur. And then we also have the kind of the medical means to bring people sort of back to life in a way that historically we would have had a harder time doing. So near-death experiences we've had numerous growing reports that are really specified and refined reports of people on their deathbed without their bodies, but looking back on their bodies. We have numerous accounts of that, which would logically presuppose something like the sort of substance dualism that has been the sort of fallback view for most religions and most cultures throughout history, some kind of dualism. I mean, I'm open to panpsychism, at least a dualist inclined panpsychism, because I think it can, well, then you have to do stuff with the causal exclusion stuff. And I think we should just reject that principle altogether. Causal closure principle. We have spirits, we have souls, we have things like that, that historically we've naturally been inclined to believe that they do exist, that they can exist beyond the body, beyond the grave. And now we have this, well, is it empirical? It's pretty close to a strong empirical case, depending on how we're defining empirical criterion. It's a pretty strong case that subjects of conscious experience exist beyond their bodies. Without their ears and their eyes, they're able to somehow see. Their consciousness seems to be expanded in some way. And so I think that's pretty profound evidence for something like dualism. But even more so, it's very compatible with the sort of theistic framework that we see in traditional religions like Christianity, where there is a life after death. And I think we should take that seriously. There was a recent a neuroscientist who was actually, there was a interesting write-up about this, who had this, it was actually in practice. It wasn't a theoretical thing that accidentally happened. He noted this, I wrote an article on it. I'm trying to remember the details. I probably should have sent it to you. I didn't think of it till now. But he noted the details of the experience of the subject while they seemed to be in a state of death or brain death. And they noted after they kind of woke up that they really did experience something like this hopeful euphoria. And they gave detailed accounts of a hopeful afterlife, which seems to indicate furthermore, not only that there is logically this subject, something like a soul, a substance, an immaterial substance that exists, but also something like traditional religion, that there is this hopeful afterlife that they had some encounter with. Now, there's ways to sort of deny that or reject that or give a hand wave. I mean, obviously, some would take those experiences non-literal. I don't have any good reason to take them as non-literal. I think these are like pretty robust accounts, and there's lots of them that are growing that seem to point beyond the sort of naturalistic frame that many of the panpsychists are operating out of, to something like theism, where souls are just naturally a part of the ontological furniture of the world.
So yeah, it's all really interesting, and to be honest, I'm a philosopher, focus on kind of my area of expertise and philosophical arguments and so on. And insofar as I deal with empirical evidence, I tend to deal with pretty uncontroversial empirical evidence, like the fine tuning of physics, surprisingly. So yeah, so I mean, I appreciate there are. I guess I'm just sort of not too well versed, to be honest, in the literature on near-death experiences. Maybe it's something I should look into more. But so I'm curious, Josh. I mean, just moving on to the next segment. Putting that on one side, why do you think consciousness requires theism? Why do we, like all explanations have to stop somewhere, as Wittgenstein said. I suppose I'm not clear why the explanation can't bottom out in conscious particles or a conscious universe. I mean, one reason is fine tuning, which I take very seriously. But I think there are ways we can accommodate, as there's the whole point in my book, cosmic purpose, cosmic goal directedness, without the traditional God. I mean, maybe you question that. But so what are the philosophical reasons, do you think, pertaining to consciousness that point us in the direction of theism? I suppose that might be where we get a potential disagreement.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate the fine tuning material in your book. I liked it. I didn't have, obviously, I don't have really many objections to it. I mean, I find your was it the Gambler's Experiment? There's two versions of the Gambler's Experiment against the kind of mini world hypotheses. I find that very right. That I find that very compelling, and you would expect that, right? Right.
Well,
So,
I'm quite excited actually that because this objection to the multiverse account of fine tuning has been in the literature for decades, but nobody knows about it outside of academic philosophy, and despite huge interest in this stuff. So I'm quite excited to get that out to a broader audience and to connect it up with the science. Like, it's in the
I think
literature
that's
on this
good.
inverse gambler's fallacy objection to the multiverse. Nobody, as far as I've seen, has connected it up to contemporary
Yeah,
scientific discussions of the multiverse. So that's something I'm pleased with.
yeah,
But what?
that's
But
good.
so,
I
Let me
think
but
say.
what about
Let me also say
consciousness
we've talked
yeah.
about that. We have talked about that on
Yeah,
Capturing
yeah,
Christianity.
yeah.
So it is
Yes,
it is
let's
out there a
tackle
little
that.
bit.
A little. Oh, good, good.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
you're
Thanks to
helping
Capturing
theism. That's
Christianity.
great.
But just to
I
try
know.
and see, just try
Yeah,
and get
let's
some
come back.
disagreement between. So what? Why do you think consciousness requires God
Yeah,
or
right.
points to God?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's lots of ways to answer that. I think I think when we begin with the sort of phenomenal consciousness that we both begin with, we take this for granted. Um, uh, I think there's something that's so radically unique about phenomenal consciousness that logically demands some kind of subject or substance that is wholly outside of the framework of naturalism, of which I don't think we should kind of hand wave certain empirical evidences in favor of it or near death experiences. Obviously, we need to bring that into our whole worldview picture, our philosophical reasoning about the world. I don't think we need to condition or limit or place limiting pressures on our speculation about what there is about the subject than simply phenomenal consciousness. There seems to be more than that based upon, well, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. There seems to be more than that is descriptive of the subject. That's wholly outside of naturalism. I don't see. So I would say that theism provides a more hospitable, natural, and this is why many dualists are naturally theists. I mean, I don't think it's coincidental that dualists are often theists. This is also why they're probably dismissed so quickly, is because they see these things as radically different, requiring radically different explanations, causal explanations, than what we know from the natural world through public observation of the data, that it doesn't seem to be the sufficient, or it doesn't supply a sufficient explanation for subjects or for subjects coming into existence. But naturally, theism seems to provide a better explanation, a more hospitable explanation. So when you take all these things together, near-death experiences, I think there's other things that we can say about from sort of empirical cases that have recently come to the fore that point in the direction of something like dualism and, by implication, theism. But I think when you take all these things together in one big picture, theism seems to be the more natural, hospitable, common sense framework in which to make sense of what we are as subjects of consciousness, and the fact that there is more going on than mere phenomenality that the panpsychist is wanting. Um,
So,
they don't
I
go
mean,
far
if we could
enough
just,
in it.
if you you know, if you just focus on, if we could focus on sort of the philosophical considerations that are more in my area of expertise. I mean, I'm not in a position to sort of debate out of body experiences and, like, because it's just maybe wrongly, but it's just not something I know a great deal about. But just on the philosophical considerations,
Uh-huh.
what, if I so the view I most favor is that the fundamental thing is the conscious universe, right? It has some kind of goal-directedness, and I mean, I try to lay out in great detail this idea of cosmopsychism, and it's not
You do.
necessarily a reductionist picture. It's not necessarily a reductionist picture, you know, that could emerge from these universe-wide fields that constitute the consciousness of the conscious universe. Um, there could emerge new irreducible layers of consciousness and agency that some of which we associate with humans and other animals. It's a non-reductive view. So what can't I account for with that view in terms of philosophical considerations? What am I unable to account for? Why do I need God uh, rather than just the conscious universe?
Do you mind if I ask a quick clarifying question, Philip? How do you define universe?
The universe, I would define it in as the thing that has the mathematical structures physics identifies. So, as I say, this is one of the things that the Bertrand Russell insight that is sometimes called the silence of physics. That physics doesn't tell us what's going on metaphysically or ontologically. It just gives us these mathematical structures. So the universe is the entity which bears those mathematical structures. I think that is a conscious mind, or that's the view I'm most inclined to. But yeah, the universe is whatever has the mathematical structures that physics identifies. Does that make sense to Cameron?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering how that's incompatible with theism, because that sounds completely compatible. So maybe the difference between the two of you would be over the extent of whatever mental properties it has, or other properties. So like presumably you would think that the universe, in addition to being conscious, has some level of value, some level of power, but you think that those are finite?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a good, Cameron. So I guess that there are two issues here, right? One, typically, and I don't know whether Josh thinks this, but typically theists will think that God is outside of the conscious universe, is distinct from the universe, So what one claim I'm making is that that's an unnecessarily profligate view. If you can just identify the fundamental mind with the conscious universe, then you get a simpler view. So that's one point. But secondly, and this might lead us on to our next segment, it's the problem of evil, right? So this fundamental conscious mind, I do not think is all powerful. I think it's good. I think it's pushing towards value, but I don't think it's all powerful because of the problem of evil. So I think it's operating under significant constraints, and those constraints are just what we call the laws of physics. So it's not that there's something outside of the conscious universe that's holding it back. It's just not all powerful. It just has certain limitations. So they would be the two things. Yeah, it's more parsimonious than supernatural theism, and it avoids the problem of evil.
So, yeah, I mean, so I appreciate those points. What should I say to that? I mean, I think the limitation that's being placed on the discussion to stick to philosophical matters is dubious because, I mean, you're bringing in all sorts of empirical data in your book that's important to how you're philosophically constructing this bigger picture of how consciousness relates to the world. But if there are these other facets that tell us more about consciousness, and particularly the subjects of consciousness, then I don't see why these should be left out of the discussion. But let me set that aside. I mean, furthermore,
can I just say a little bit, a little bit brief about that? It's not that there's anything wrong with appealing to them. It's just I don't know anything about them. So, and in my work, I tend to, I do appeal to fine tuning, but that's because the basic data of fine tuning is not. I wouldn't defend like some fringe empirical view.
Yeah.
Like, for better or worse, out of body experiences are, a fringe view. So when I talk about fine tuning because the basic data of fine tuning, just like these numbers in physics, you have to be in a narrow range. I think that's not very controversial. So so I'm not saying it's illegitimate. I'm just saying I don't know anything about it. So that's
okay. I mean, there seems to be another limiting pressure on the discussion regarding regarding how we're taking reality to be somehow constrained to the universe. If we have additional evidence that points us beyond the universe, we should reject naturalism just as a framework altogether and accept some sort of theistic paradigm. I mean, not necessarily Christian theism, but some other theism that's more compatible with the kind of moral issues that you have with traditional classical theism. Right? I mean, the data, some of the data that we've already mentioned pushes us out of naturalism, it seems, altogether already. And that's
Like
a
which
limiting
any
pressure on
which so but which philosophical, are there any, just to get them clear on your view, are there any philosophical considerations you think my cosmopsychism, can't deal with, and so ought to move me to theism? Or is it just the empirical considerations with out of body experiences and so on?
Well, it's not just the empirical considerations. I don't know. So if we're just trying to get after, is the theory coherent? Are we just getting after philosophical coherence of cosmopsychism without bringing in additional evidence? I mean, you're happy to bring in fine-tuning evidence, right? And you see that as non-controversial evidence. That's fine. I mean, I agree with that. I see these other things as really not all that controversial unless you already presuppose naturalism. I don't see them as controversial. I accept, for example, demons and spirits, that they actually exist. And I think we have lots of good reasons to believe that they exist. I also accept the fact that physicalism, or something that's physicalist akin to that sort of ontology, can't make sense of, say, dementia patients who experience deep deterioration of the brain, yet they have heightened experiences of God, and at least logically heightened experiences of themselves while they are experiencing dementia. These sorts of things are natural, philosophically interesting data to make sense of as a theist and as a dualist. But let's set that aside.
Okay.
Okay, we can set that aside, I think. I just think you should reject naturalism. That's the biggest thing, I think, in terms of trying to make.
But are there any
psychism.
philosophical reasons why I should reject naturalism?
I guess those aren't not considered philosophical reasons. Okay, so let's think about. Okay, I wasn't thinking that
It's
those
fine
were.
if there aren't.
No, I was.
Well, they're empirical. They're empirical. They're empirical. They're controversial empirical claims, right?
I
And
don't
no,
see
I'm
why
not.
they're
I'm not saying they're
controversial.
silly. I'm not saying anything about them. I'm just sort of clarifying your view. Is it your view that there are any philosophical rather than empirical considerations to do with explaining consciousness? Right. I reject physicalism not because I think there's some empirical evidence against it. I just think there's good philosophical arguments that it can't make sense of consciousness.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
I
I
get
thought your
that.
position was like there's some things like that, like it can't make sense of
There are. Oh, yeah, there
subjects or
are other
something.
things. I guess I'm struggling to see the sort of demarcation here, um, but I think there are I think there is an analogy between the sort of panpsychist view and physicalism, at least as you explain it, that seems to put limiting pressures on how it is that we're conceiving of reality and consciousness in relation to reality itself, that I think is unfortunate and doesn't provide the explanatory edge that it's needed. But let's set that
But why is
aside.
it unfortunate? Yeah, is it unfortunate? I mean, I like that feature of it, that it's similar to physicalism, because that's what gives us the simplicity, that it's just, has the same it's
Because you bought
causal
into
structure as.
naturalism.
But what's
Yeah,
wrong with
because
that? That's what I'm trying to get. What's wrong
we're
with that? Are there any philosophical arguments against naturalism,
well, I don't think
yeah?
there's philosophical reasons, good reasons to accept naturalism itself. But yeah, I
Well, I
don't see
just
any
go
good
Can
reason
it,
to accept
I asked
naturalism altogether.
sorry to jump in here, but I asked for a definition of universe earlier, and man, naturalism, natural, physical, even some of these terms, like I literally don't know what they mean. when people say naturalism, they can mean all sorts of things. Like Paul Draper's got a definition where he says that mental things are more fundamental than physical things, and then theism would just be that naturalism is the idea that physical things are more fundamental than mental things, and then theism is just going to be the opposite, where it's going to be you've got mental things at the foundation. But how do you guys define naturalism? Can we agree on a term that works? Because you're asking for evidence for and against naturalism, and I just personally have an issue with that term. But if we can use a stipulative definition, that would help.
I think it's committed in some way to causal exclusion and the principle of causal closure, at least a modified version of that principle. And I don't see why anybody should accept that.
It depends what you mean by, I mean, that's another tricky word, causal exclusion as well. If you just mean this very reductionist picture where physics is running the show and everything that happens is determined by the arrangements of particles, unless apart from sort of quantum chanciness or something. So yeah, I am inclined to reject that, because I am inclined to this strongly non-reductionist view where new layers of consciousness emerge and have new dynamics. So in that sense, I reject causal closure. I suppose I just don't think there's anything. I don't see any reason to believe in anything outside of the physical universe, if you like. If that's what naturalism means. I mean, I agree with you, Cameron. I tend not to use the word naturalism. It's not totally clear what it rules in or out. But if
do you think?
I suppose what I'm yeah.
Do you
I
think
don't see why I should believe in anything outside the universe?
I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, and I think the reason why I'm jumping in here is I think this will help the audience to understand what the view is, because it's very clear to me what dualism means. You've got two different types of substances, both of them are real. But on panpsychism, because earlier one of the objections that was raised, you punted to a sort of non-physical or non-reductionist account of panpsychism, and I suppose that would also apply at the fundamental level, the cosmo psychism, where the fundamental, the universe itself is consciousness, is conscious in some sense. But I'm having trouble. What is that type? What is that thing, that consciousness? What is that? Is that a different substance than the physical? Is it not? Is it physical? Is it a physical substance? What is that? And then another question that I've got for you, Philip, is one of the objections you raised earlier was that cosmopsychism seems to be a more simple view of the world, but it seems to me like you've still got a consciousness at the fundamental level of reality. So really, it's just a matter of where you place it. Theism places it before physics or before the physical universe, whereas you've got this additional conscious thing at the ground level of the universe. So it doesn't really seem like it's simpler. It seems like you just put it in a different spot. You put the mental thing in a different place. But maybe I'm just completely misunderstanding. So please help me out.
So this Bertrand Russell panpsychism, and it is incredible. In the last 10 or 15 years, panpsychism's gone from a view that was laughed at insofar as it's thought of at all to being a view that's taken very seriously. As when I studied philosophy, it was just dualism or physicalism, but panpsychism has emerged as this view that's published on and taught to our undergraduates and so on. So it's really interesting, and it's a middle way in this sense. It basically, the panpsychist says there's just physical stuff, but there's more to physical stuff than physics tells us about. In fact, more than that, physics doesn't tell us what matter is. That sounds really bizarre. What do you mean physics? You read a popular book of cosmology, it seems to be giving us this rich story about the nature of space and time and matter. But this was Bertrand Russell's insight, and Arthur Eddington developed these ideas as well. And there's precedent in Schopenhauer and lots of the earlier thinkers. Physics actually doesn't tell us what matter is. It just tells us what it does. What does physics tell us about an electron? It tells us it has mass and charge. And those properties are totally defined in terms of behavior. Attraction, repulsion, resistance to acceleration. It's all about what stuff does. So physics is like playing chess when you don't know what the pieces are made of. You just know what they do. And if you know what they do, you can produce incredible technology. But it doesn't tell it. It tells us what matter does, not what it is.
That's
so the
right.
panpsychist says, well, I'm going to tell you what matter is. It's consciousness. As I sometimes put it, for the panpsychist, matter is what consciousness does. So there's just consciousness stuff, but that is physical stuff. So just coming briefly to Cameron's second point, yeah, I just think it's a more yeah, you're right that both have a fundamental consciousness at the basis of reality, but it's just more parsimonious in the sense of, why believe in a non-mental physical universe and this other conscious thing that created it, when you can just believe in one thing that is the conscious universe? So why believe in two things of fundamentally different nature when you can just believe in one thing? Unless you tell me something I can't account for with my cosmopsychism, then it seems to me a preferable view to supernaturalist theism, because you just believe in fewer things.
I think that's it.
All right. Yeah, I've interjected too much. Let Farris respond or give any thoughts on that, and then let's try, if we can, move into. Let me see how much time we've got left. Okay, we're good on time, so let's move into the problem of evil after we get some thoughts from Josh.
Yeah, I think, that's an interesting response. I think so. Skrbina wrote this article. There's a couple things going on that I want to just make some comment to, give some comment to. Skrbina wrote this article in Contemporary Dualism where he basically makes this argument, something like this, more at a local level, but it applies at a global level as you're conceiving it. That we just have this intuition that reality is one rather than a pluralism or something. That monism is true in some sense. It's just, I think that's an argument from intuition, and on some days, it depends on what I'm smoking. I agree with that intuition. That was a little bit of a joke, but not much. It depends on what cigar I'm smoking and how much power it has. But I mean, to be fair, I mean, I get the intuition, and I'm not sure that I find it overwhelming as an intuition. The other thing you brought up, which I think is really interesting, and I actually agree with you, is that physics doesn't tell us the intrinsic nature of physicality or material, if there is such a thing as material, whatever. If there is material substance or substances, I don't know. It doesn't tell us that. It tells us how it behaves. It tells us what it does. It tells us functionally what it does, which is completely consistent with dualism, the dualist paradigm. But that's an interesting point, and I think that's in part why I don't feel the pull of the evidence as a dualist to buy panpsychism, given its naturalistic framework, and further the fact that the underlying science that it's adhering to doesn't supply us with the knowledge of intrinsic natures themselves. We know those by way of consciousness. And what we know about consciousness is what I know about my consciousness. And it doesn't seem to map on in any analogous way with physical things or physical particles at the fundamental level. The analogy breaks down. So that's one important point. But also, when we get to the question of, based upon that reasoning, I don't think we can really have a science of consciousness. And I think we need to take that really seriously, as we take more seriously the richness of consciousness and the subject of consciousness underlying it. We can't have a science of consciousness because neuroscience doesn't give us knowledge of intrinsic natures themselves. Information, even the information theory, which I find a little bizarre, it only makes sense of as describing potentially the behavior of consciousness, which seems to fit better with idealism. Actually, if we posit this underlying substance, then that is just the manifestation. What we're studying in neuroscience, or what these rigid scientists are studying is just the behavior potentially of consciousness and what it does in the physical world.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot in that I agree with. In fact, I mean, just to throw in, yeah, I'm very interested in this issue of why we should think simplicity corresponds to truth. And I mean, I was recently, Paul Draper's got a excellent new book in the making, defending atheism, and he had a grant and paid for me and others to read the manuscript and comment on it. And I think he's got a really nice account of objective Bayesianism and there being a connection between intrinsic prior probability and simplicity, or he's got a more fundamental account of that. So that very much informed some of the discussions of probability in the fine-tuning bit of my book. But yeah, I suppose we keep coming back to you seem to think, Josh, that there's some kind of clash between the consciousness as we know about it and the physical world, but that's where we bring this point of the silence of physics, that we don't really know very much about the physical world from science. We just know it's sort of what it does, its structure. So
That's right.
I think, to my mind, that removes the clash of just the panpsychist unification of just saying physics tells us what stuff does, panpsychism tells us what stuff is. And but anyway, maybe we should move on to the problem of evil. I don't know. Josh could have the
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you want to do,
interesting.
Cameron?
That's interesting. Yeah. Or maybe idealism tells us what stuff is. But yeah, maybe we can move on to the problem of evil. I mean,
before we do that, can I ask? Sorry to jump back in. Can I ask one more clarifying question? I think this will also help when it comes to the problem of evil, setting it up. Okay, so when it comes to cosmopsychism, what sort of predictions do you expect that theory to make versus something like a perfect being theism? Perfect being theism seems to make some predictions about the world. I mean, that's why the problem of evil is even interesting in the first place. So what sort of prediction, because you've said a couple of times, like, name something that cosmopsychism cannot account for. But then I'm wondering, what sort of predictions do you think that theory actually makes? Because there are certain things that theists will point to. Let me just take a token example, something like moral knowledge. Does that seem like the existence of moral knowledge? Does that seem like something that cosmopsychism would predict?
So moral knowledge. Well, I mean, I guess I've got a kind of
I don't want to get too I don't mean to get too much into that example.
I'm trying to think how to answer. Look, I mean, to the extent, again, we've got the two ways in which cosmopsychism differs from theism. One is that it's not a supernatural thing distinct from the physical universe, but I don't think, insofar as I don't think that makes much of a difference to the predictions in terms of moral knowledge or something, because you've still got this perfect being at the base of things. Really, I suppose the difference would come with the problem of evil. So, like, in my mind, there's two data points. There's the fine-tuning, maybe moral knowledge, certainly psychophysical harmony, but also the suffering. And so what I'm doing with the cosmopsychism is constructing a hypothesis that by construction can account for both of these data points. Whereas I think perfect being theism doesn't fit very well with the suffering data point. Yeah, so that's very much, it's constructed to precisely for the task. Just like you might construct a scientific theory to account for some particular data, I've constructed this theory to account for fine-tuning and suffering. It's constructed for that purpose.
So one concern there would be, does that make your theory more complex? If you've got to build into the theory certain things that are going to create the specific predictions of, say, evil and suffering, would that then make your hypothesis more complex than theism? Because theism, again, is just the hypothesis that there's a perfect being, and that's pretty simple.
Yeah, people might be interested. I've got into this a little bit with Richard Swinburne, who's reviewing the book for the Times Literary Supplement, and when that comes out in the near future, we've pre-recorded a debate on this on the Unbelievable channel that's going to go out at some point. they're waiting for the review to come out. But yeah, I suppose this is where Swinburne pushes me, that my view is less simple than his, and I agree that actually I do think he's right that perfect being theism, omni-god as I call it, is a quite simple hypothesis, because this being just has all the characteristics to the max. But I sometimes worry that Swinburne sort of, as it were, fetishizes simplicity a little bit. Like, I mean, to take an example he himself gives that might help people understand what's going on here. He says, before we had specific evidence that the speed of light had a finite velocity, we took it to be infinite, because infinity is a simpler value than some finite rate, finite velocity. But then as soon as we get empirical evidence to the contrary, we don't try to find clever ways of still believing the speed of light is infinite. We're quite happy. The imperative is not believe the simplest theory, but the simplest theory compatible with the data. So I think cosmopsychism is less simple than perfect being theism, but it's not that much less simple. It's just the simplicity of physics, which we hope will get more simple as time goes on. And yeah, and it's better at accounting for the data. So I would say it's less simple than perfect being theism, but it's the simplest theory that can account for the data.
Okay, so I think that does help us set up the conversation on the problem of evil. So let's turn it over back to Dr. Farris. I know that you had some thoughts that you wanted to share on the problem of evil. So why don't we go ahead and do that, and then the remainder of the time we'll spend on discussing that problem.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so I hopefully someday we can come back and talk about Spinoza and contingent, non-contingent facts and how you account for it. I'm really interested in that, and whether or not cosmic idealism or something of the sort does a better job. Those were some of the other philosophical issues, obviously, we just didn't have enough time for. I think those are interesting. So the problem of evil, yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to say right now about this. I mean, maybe I'll have more to say as we discuss it further. I mean, I read the book, and I read the chapter on the problem of evil in particular as an objection to the omni-God, which is an objection to kind of more traditional Christian theism, which we as Christians, we creedally hold to something like the sort of omnitheist you put forward. There are various neoclassical theisms on offer that might mitigate or soften the blow, as it were, of the objection that you're raising. At the moment, I don't feel particularly overwhelmed to move. I think if there is such a thing as moral properties in the world, we affirm moral realism at all, then I think I am inclined intuitively to think that something like theism is a better explanation, or at least a more fitting paradigm to work within. I'm also inclined to think that, well, at least we have a problem of evil that we can actually talk about and say something about, and we need to try to make some sense out of it. But I think we can make some sense out of it as theists. Whether we modify some of the omnithesis as a perfect being theologian, which I think would be equivalent to, in part, what you're doing, although you're not a theist per se, what you're doing with the universe as the conscious wave function. I think it would be relevantly equivalent in some ways to that, if you were to modify. The other thing I would just say is, I think, we need to do a bit of work in theodicy in order to make sense of, provide a robust story for why it is that there actually is evil in the world. And I think a free will defense provides the at least initial justification for there being evil. Without free beings, we would have a really uninteresting world, I would think. And not only an uninteresting world, but also a world that well, it kind of undermines what's most interesting about being in relationships with others that are governed by certain moral parameters and obligations and things of that sort, which make free will meaningful. Um, and so I want free will. And as a theist, I hope free will is true. The more robust, strong version of free will, even. Um,
Mm.
the other thing is, I think we can say more about the theodicy in terms of coupling free will with soul making theodicy, because there's something about the soul that needs to develop and grow and become better, become more moral. And there's something about Christian theism that provides a nice framework for that. As you've said before, you are you're an agnostic, but you're also a practicing. I don't know. Well, I mean, so this is talked about in several pieces of philosophical literature, like a kind of practicing pragmatic theist of some sort or something like that, but not actually believing that theism is actually true at the end of the day. But you practice the liturgy at your Anglican church, right? Because you find
Yeah.
meaningful structure in that. You find that to be beneficial to you as hopefully as a person that's developing. And and maybe there's a hopeful, optimistic framework within that liturgical structure, which I strongly believe in. Um, I was a I was a kind of a low church evangelical, and when I went to England, I joined a Church of England church. And when I did that, I began to get a taste for liturgy and the practicing of the whole gospel story, because the liturgy is supposed to bring to life the whole gospel story of Jesus Christ. And in that process, I found like, wow, this is really meaningful in a way that, yeah, as an evangelical, I had some sort of conversion story growing up where I recognized something about my moral failures and my moral decline and the need for some kind of salvation. But it was in the liturgical structure that even became more alive to me, where I began to practice Christian theism in a way that was more than just apologetic propositional arguments, syllogisms.
Mm.
And I think kind of a soul making theodicy provides a kind of big picture philosophical framework that in which liturgy that we're talking about makes sense. And I think there's something
Mm.
more, and maybe even something about the problem of evil that I don't quite understand at the moment. But what I do understand is that there is morality in the world, that I have fallen short, and that I need the gospel story on a regular basis. And this is why I take the Eucharist every week.
Mm. It's loads of really interesting stuff there, Josh. Thanks. I'll just make 3 points, and I'll be quite brief on each of them. Yeah, firstly, I mean, something I've discovered in recent times, there are Christians who don't think God is all powerful, and this is one of the possibilities I take very seriously in the book. Um, Process theists, in particular. There's a very good panpsychist philosopher called Godehard Brundtrup, who is
Yes.
a Jesuit priest as well as a
Yeah.
philosopher, and he talked to me about this as his sort of non all powerful God. And when I first met him at a Panpsychism conference in Munich, and he was sat across from me, and on his laptop he had a sticker with "You can't make this shit up," which I thought was quite good for this Jesuit panpsychist philosopher. He's a very cool character. But anyway, so I mean, to the extent that Christians depart from the omnigod, I really have no objection to that view, and that's helped me to become more open to the possibility of Christianity being true. So in my religious spiritual life, I've moved from being a fictionalist who thinks it's definitely false. It's a beautiful metaphor, identifying God with the naked executed peasant rather than the king in the castle, the guy who hangs out with sinners and outcasts, the wonderful inversion of worldly values we find in Christianity. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. I love my little girls getting raised on these moral ideas. But so I guess I've moved from thinking it's a beautiful metaphor to being open to it as a possibility if we go the sort of Gerhard Brüntrup process theology route or something like that. That's something I want to think more about. Thomas Oord as well has made sense of that. I met him at a conference recently, the British Society for Philosophy of Religion conference, and we interacted on that. In terms of morality, secondly, I'm a Platonist about objective morality. Well, I think was one of the more original arguments in the book, I think, is that we can use fine-tuning as sort of empirical evidence for objective value. I'm not going to go into that now for sake of time, but I was quite pleased that I think that's quite an interesting argument, not made before, I don't think. But yeah, there's an issue in moral knowledge there. I've got this kind of Aristotelian Platonist view I'm developing to try and make sense of moral knowledge. But I'm not going to go into that here. But yeah, just coming right to the core of the problem of evil. So what I focus on in the book is starts with what I like about Richard. Well, I talk about skeptical theism as well. Put that on one side for a moment, at least. What I like about Swinburne's work on the problem of evil is he takes seriously not only are there certain goods that exist in a world with natural evil that wouldn't exist in a world without natural evil, but also, does God have the right to kill and maim in order to bring about those natural goods, which I take it that God does by creating hurricanes and disease and so on, right? So the classic, to make that vivid, think about the classic case of inconsequential, the argument you learn as a philosophy undergraduate against very crude forms of consequentialism, like Sam Harris's, where you've got this doctor who could kill one patient, healthy patient, harvest their organs and save 5 lives, gives the liver to one person, the heart to another, and so on. Now, that doctor would perhaps increase the well-being in the world, if we assume that no one finds out about it or something. But most of us think that doctor would not have the right to kill that patient, to use them in that way. Similarly, even if there are certain goods that a world with natural evil has, that a world without it lacks, I think a creator would not have the right to infringe our right to life and health and security by allowing a world of natural evil as she does, as God, if God exists, inevitably does. So that's really what I focus on with the problem of evil. I don't think, I argue that a creator wouldn't have the right to bring about natural evil.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts there. Yeah, and you do bring that out in your book. Why? Let's see. Yeah, well, where do we go from there? Yeah, I think well, a few things. I think I don't know that you necessarily have to go as far as Gerhard Brüntrup, which it is ironic that he's a Catholic and a process theist, but that's another story. I don't know that you have to go that far in terms of process theism. I mean, you could accept some version of open theism, and I think, right? I mean, you could still say that God is all loving, but because he's created the world in the way that he has, right? He's given human beings genuine freedom, like in a robust agent causal libertarian sense, right? If you think that's true, that is a moral, meaningful framework in which to exist and be as human beings. Then there is a real sense in which, at least logically, he is limited to controlling, right, the control issue, controlling all evils from occurring. And I think, I mean, that seems sufficient for me. You could still affirm something like that on, well, even, foreknowledge or even middle knowledge, but and you could still have a robust sense in which God is omni-loving, omni-good, and also omnipowerful, right? All powerful, or at least he has maximal power, right? He has maximal power given the conditions that he's created or set up in the world itself. I'm not an expert on open theism or the problem of evil, but I would think that would be sufficient for responding to the kind of charge that you have put forward against classical theism.
I don't know. That wouldn't be enough for me, I think. I mean, in particular, for example, some of the horrors we find in the natural world. Why create the North American long-tailed shrew that paralyzes its prey and then eats it alive slowly over several days before it eventually dies from its wounds? I mean, I don't know, where does that figure in soul making or anything like that? So, so I think if I'm going to limit God, if to the extent that I'm open to the God hypothesis, it's going to be a creator who um, cannot create, is unable to create intelligent life just like that. uh the only way she can create an intelligent life is by creating a universe with the right physics that will eventually evolve intelligent life. And God's like, this is going to be messy, sorry, it's this or nothing. It's this or not. This is the only way I can do it, and it's better to have intelligent life than not. So that to the extent, and whether that's compatible with Christianity, Tom Ord tries to say a very, very limited God is compatible with Christianity. Of course, you've got the problem of, okay, how do we make sense of the resurrection without bringing back the problem of evil? If God can raise the dead, why doesn't she do it more often, and so on and so forth? So there's so to my mind, it would be more than just open theism. Although that's a good move in a good direction, but I'd want to
Yeah,
go further in handicapping the Lord.
handicapping the Lord. That sounds so naughty. That sounds so naughty. Um,
It did. I got a little bit of a shiver down, a bit of a thrill from saying that.
yeah, yeah. A thrill, or was
But
that
yeah,
a chill?
yeah,
I
I
don't know,
do.
but anyway, um, yeah, uh, yeah. Well, I think this is a good direction. I mean, for thinking about the problem of evil, obviously, the problem of evil is a real problem, and we as theists have it. I wonder if others really do have it in the same way. But I think, I think, I think. I forgot your last point. I was still thinking about the thrill chill. I got distracted
I
by
suppose. I mean, the suffering in the natural world, I suppose, might be. I don't see how free will or soul making helps us with. Um, you know, it's gruesome out there. It's the animals that paralyze themselves. Paralyze their prey. Yeah, that's
it's a
that's a big
product of
difficulty for me.
biological evolution, the way that God has set it up, right? And we
Mm.
we both accept that, right? I mean, even the psalmist often prays about the ruthlessness of nature, and
Mm.
how violent it is, and I don't.
But why would God, if God has options, why would she choose to bring us about by such a torturous, long-winded process like natural selection? I mean, just on the face of it, it doesn't, I don't know. You know, Christians and Jews hope, one day the lion will lie down with the lamb. Why not do that now? I don't know. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
oh, so
why
yeah.
would
Oh,
God choose to create through natural selection?
right.
That's
Oh,
that's
you
it.
did.
Which was, yeah.
You did bring that up about resurrection. Why doesn't he raise more from the dead? That's related to this latter point. I think. Um, well, I think it's important to point out that, well, I mean, according to the Christian story, all will be raised from the dead, and there was first fruits found in Christ that we have good evidence for, that he was raised from the dead in a way that non-theistic or naturalist paradigms could not explain. And so, given that we have this case of resurrection, I think, well, we have good reason to hope that we all will be resurrected. And so all things will be made new, and the problem of evil will be a problem of the past at some point.
But in the meantime, it's a bit grim. But I'm interested in this project. I might write a paper on this. I gave a talk at the British Society for Philosophy of Religion on whether I just got, just almost as an intellectual exercise, lost down this rabbit hole of whether you could reconcile Christianity with a God of limited powers. What do we say about the resurrection? What do we say? And yeah, I think, yeah, I'm kind of interested in that question, and I might at some point write an essay on that. But
Yeah.
it's certainly not straightforward. But maybe it can be
Philip,
done.
You and I have gone back and forth a little bit on this this topic, the problem of evil, in some previous videos. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think? If I can just kind of summarize broadly, the issue that you are seeing here is that the world that we see doesn't line up with what we would expect if God were to exist. It seems surprising that this world, this particular world with the amount of suffering, and that you even gave a specific example. So that is not what we would expect on theism. What kind of world would we expect? Like what? So part of what I think what my question is getting at is, what would you say is like the most valuable world that God could create? What would that world look like?
Well,
would it have no suffering?
I think there are two questions here. What kind of world we expect might be different from what is the most valuable world, because that was the point of the consequentialist example. It might be that the world as we have it is more valuable, but God would do wrong if she created it, such a world. Just like the doctor increases happiness by killing the one patient and harvesting their organs, but that doctor does wrong by infringing the rights. So if you're asking me what world would we expect, I guess I'd say heaven straight away. Just like the beatific vision, that's supposed to be the end point. We go there straight away. Now you might say to me, okay, but there's all these goods that we'd miss out on in terms of struggle and courage and feeling compassion and so on. And I see the force of that, but then I just think it would still be wrong for a creator to kill and maim in order to bring about those goods. So that's not what we'd expect on theism. So I have a couple of analogies in the book. Like I imagine I have this story where, so I'm walking home from work. This isn't true. And I hear a baby screaming in a oh God, my phone's gone, in a burning building. And I, leap into action, shimmy up the drain pipe, climb in the window, rescue this innocent child, jump out the window, land, and then there's a crowd clapping. And then someone comes up with a microphone and a camera crew and says, "You've won first pet prize on Who Dares." And it was set up. It's a game show. And suddenly, I still did something very courageous. Maybe I saved that child's life. But suddenly this has gone from, it's kind of tainted. This is now a bit sick. It's like kind of Squid Game. That, if anyone saw that Korean movie where they put people in all these horrible situations that they're going to die. And so to my mind, if God has given natural evil to give us these challenges, it's a bit like Squid Game, if I can put it like that. So I don't think an all-powerful God would do that, even if in some sense it's a world with more value.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, no, I do think it was good to point out the distinction between, there could be a world that is most valuable, but then there will still be reasons to not expect God to create that world, because then it would violate, if God is a moral agent and has certain rights and doesn't have the right to do, create this most valuable world.
Or maybe, maybe God could have given us a few little challenges, some obstacle courses and no, like more. It just seems, the extent of it, I suppose, is another thing. The sheer extent of it seems, and it's going on a while, isn't it? And, natural selection. So maybe we could have a world with certain challenges, certain suffering, but the whole natural selection thing is, anyway, Yeah. So these things. Yeah. So, but to answer your question, heaven right away.
Yeah, well, I suppose my question was mainly about because it is a really interesting question. Like, does God have the right to create this or that world? Does God have any rights in the first place? Is God a moral agent? Those are all very interesting questions. But the question that I was interested in was the question of axiology. What do you think is the most valuable world? Supposing that we could put those issues to the side just for the sake of conversation, what would you think is the most valuable world that could exist? It sounded like you didn't really have too many. Didn't sound like you had too many objections to the view that this is the most valuable world.
I like that you've posed this question very directly, because it's maybe something I should definitely work out for my own mind. I suppose I would say either heaven straight away. I mean, the beatific vision is supposed to be incredible, so maybe that, or maybe a world with some challenges, some suffering, but not the immensity we find. So one of those two, and I'm a little bit agnostic.
Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
Just a quick point about the beatific vision. I mean, if we are affirming free will, and that is part of the sort of Christian story, beatific vision seems to be logically, it just seems impossible on the sort of the way you're recounting it. I don't think God can. I mean, I'm a believer in some kind of minimalist purgatory, right? I mean, I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I still believe in a minimalist purgatory because I think commonsensically there's still something about my soul that's going to need some further work in the afterlife. That during this life I haven't developed all the sufficient virtues to withhold the glory and beauty of God, which is far bigger than me. Right? I mean, and if that is predicated upon some notion of free will, especially a robust notion of free will, I just don't see how that'd be possible for God. You call it, I mean, in theological circles, somebody called, maybe I called it that. I mean, the zap view, that God just kind of zaps you into perfection, moral perfection, and you're just awesome. I don't think many people that I encounter in this day and age are morally perfect or even close to it. And I think all of them, Christian or not, there is, I mean, well, certainly Christian, they're going to have to probably do some soul work in the next life in terms of developing certain virtues that they didn't quite actualize in this life. So I think that's going to be required. I mean, I think I'll be in purgatory probably for something.
So, Philip, I apologize for it.
See you there.
I feel like we've kind of put you on the back foot. You're on a show with two Christians, and I do my best every show to like not interject and not get too involved. But I've been thinking about these issues so long that I just can't help myself sometimes. But that being said, I wanted to give you. We're closing in on the 2-hour mark of the conversation. I said that's how long I'd keep you guys. So let's give you, Philip, the chance to give any sort of closing thoughts on what we've just talked about, maybe even the entire show, and then we'll get some closing thoughts from Josh, and then we'll close out the show.
So we're skipping Q&A, or
we've gone too long, unfortunately, on the conversation section. So yeah, that's
cool. It's been fun. Yeah, well, so I love these debates, and this is just what I want from I've engaged with both theists like Richard Swinburne and now this, which is great, and also atheists like Daniel Dennett. We were on BBC Radio talking about these issues recently, and I hope this book has got, whether you're a theist or an atheist, you'll find support for your argument. Also healthy challenge, and I really just want the truth at the end of the day. I'm really kind of thirsty to have, obviously we'll never know for certain, but to have our best Bayesian guess as to what reality is really like. And I think in intellectual circles in the West, people are very trained now to be alert to their religious biases, but less so to be trained to their secular biases. I annoy people on Twitter by saying Bertrand Russell would have believed in cosmic purpose on the basis of fine tuning because he followed the evidence where it led very passionately, and the evidence just wasn't there then. So this is what I'm passionate about, and I'm open-minded about having these discussions. And I might change my mind tomorrow. I might go in either direction, but just to sum up where I'm feeling at the moment, I don't see why Panpsychism is philosophically inadequate in any way in accounting for all the data of science, the reality of consciousness, free will, and irreducible subjects, if you like. I think it can, in principle, account for all of those in a way that's more parsimonious than believing in anything supernatural. So, if you don't, if you that's to me is the theoretical imperative. Go for the simplest theory that can account for the data. And given that I'm still so moved by the problem of evil, it seems to me the appropriate way of rendering cosmopsychism is with limiting the capacities of God. You get a theory that can account for all of the data. But I'm happy to carry on the discussion, and I spend a lot of time arguing on Twitter. Philip_Goff. Come and have an argument if you're not persuaded. Buy my book first. Buy my book first, and then have an argument.
Yes. Buy both books, not just Philip's book. Buy both of these books. They're both important.
Absolutely.
And then I did want to mention Josh and I have been working on a video for several weeks now. We're in the editing process, and so it's very near completion. But it's a short, and this may work actually as a sort of, what's the right term? Example or paradigmatic example? So, like a
pairing,
a theme. No, it's going to be. It's going to be like a template. There we go. Template is the right word for videos moving forward, where we've basically responded to 10 of the most common objections to dualism in like 1 minute responses. And then beyond that, if you guys want to go deeper into that, he's written a blog post where he expands on all of the responses. We can do something like that for, all sorts of different topics. Maybe Philip, that would actually be a fun video to do with you on fine tuning. The 10 most common objections to fine tuning, and then respond to those in a video. Cool. That'd be fun. So, that video with Josh is coming out very soon on the channel. So, will be again a sort of another promotion of his book and his work. So, but Josh, let's get your closing thoughts on today's conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Philip. This was fun and enjoyable, and I don't know what you missed in the intro, but I'll reiterate some of the highlights real quick. The book is fascinating. It's interesting. I tried to take something of a deep dive in both of your two most recent books. This one is very thick and dense. It is very clear to read, and so I recommend it. It's very good. It is very dense, though, in places. There's a lot going on. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate it's very provocative. The book is, providing a via media or attempting to. With that said, the biggest claim that panpsychism provides a more parsimonious view in various ways than dualism, I'm not convinced. I think it lacks probably still the explanatory edge that dualism does. It lacks the sort of explanatory potency that dualism has with respect to some philosophical issues related to the unity of consciousness. We didn't get into all the aspects of the unity of consciousness, so we kind of have to leave that open to some extent. The nature of particularity, my soul being my soul rather than just a generalizable soul that comes from a generalizable process. And further, the idea that it provides a sort of explanatory framework for other aspects of reality, like near-death experiences. At the end of the day, I still have some questions that we really didn't get into, and that is why we should accept naturalism at all. I don't find that compelling. We should be pushed into supernaturalism for all sorts of reasons. what it is in terms of science that is acceptable and not acceptable. At one level, I'm very persuaded that, well, the IIT, Integrated Information Theory, is not science, at least strictly speaking, in the limiting ways that many scientists are practicing science. And as a dualist, I'm fine with that. I obviously accept other sources of knowledge as being legitimate sources of knowledge that need to be brought into the bigger picture of how we make sense of our universe and the world more broadly. And I think dualism does a much better job of that than panpsychism, particularly of a naturalist bent panpsychism. I think a theist who might be a panpsychist might have a good reason to say that God just set it up this way, and so He designed it this way. That's fine. Naturalism, though, is I think a dead end, and we need to give it up. About the problem of evil, there are concerns. There is a real problem of evil for theism. I take it. I don't find it overwhelming at the moment. I don't find it overly compelling that we should give up the notion of a Christian God. Maybe not even the classical Christian God. I think those things are above my pay grade and above our pay grade. There is something higher than us that is unconditioned. And so anyway, but souls naturally fit with a kind of theism. I think we're left with good reasons to believe in theism and dualism.
All right. Well, thanks to both you guys.
Cameron,
yes.
Can I say one very brief sentence? If people are interested in hearing more about the consciousness stuff, quick plug for my podcast, Mind Chat, which I do with someone with the polar opposite view of me who doesn't believe in consciousness at all. So I think it's everywhere. He thinks it's nowhere. Sorry, I hope that's not too inappropriate to just throw that in there. In case
No, who was your guest?
I listened to your Halloween one just the other day.
Oh yeah, it's very, very silly. It's not like Cameron in its very low production values, very silly. We interviewing scientists and philosophers of consciousness. The lowest production values and the greatest philosophy. Mind chat. Anyway, sorry.
We didn't ask the most important question.
We haven't got to that.
Yeah,
far more interesting. Yeah, you beer. You're a connoisseur of beer, right? You're a connoisseur.
I drink a lot of it. I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur.
You have a good palate for beer, right?
I think I'm sort of. I have a theory that I'm sort of short-sighted taste-wise because I can never seem to smell things, and I don't seem to enjoy food as much as other people. I mean, I eat, but so I think I've got a really crap palate actually. But I like to drink a lot of beer. I don't know, just because. But I like, as I say, craft ales, American IPAs, because they have the good qualities of British ale, like the taste and but also the bubbles and the coldness of lager, and so yeah, that's what I go for. What about yourself, Josh?
One of the things that as Americans we do well is craft beer. I mean, right, there's a greatness there, right? We can affirm that. I really appreciate German beer though. I've really grown to like German beer. There's something about the water that seems better than.
It says in my pub at the bar, there's a little sign saying, "Beer is proof that God wants us to be happy."
See? Yeah. You're not persuaded yet, are you?
Case closed.
Okay. Very good. That's a good note
I did want to ask, Philip, have you ever had Carback beer? Have you heard of that brand?
Think so. No. I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Yeah.
Texas
Okay. So Texas beer. So next time you're in Texas, or they do serve it around the country, but they have some of the best IPAs I've ever had. They're always experimenting. They've got some of like the top guys to have ever crafted beer. That work at their what do you call it, brewery. So yeah, they're amazing. Everyone here is just like the Carback is everywhere. So yeah, next time you're
maybe if Joe Rogan has me on again, and I have to go to Texas, then I'll. But
yeah,
I don't think he knew what the hell I was talking about when I spoke to him, so I don't think that's likely. But maybe I'll be in Texas for other reasons.
yeah, maybe we are gonna actually start a new channel and start to create documentaries. So maybe in some future documentary we'll cross paths in person sometime. But I did want to let you guys know about a future video that's coming out this Thursday between Jimmy. It's not between, it's more of a dialogue between the two of them. AP, Apostate Prophet, and Jimmy Akin will be both be on the channel talking about the Israel Hamas war that's going on right now. So we're going to get a Christian perspective and an atheist perspective on what's going on over there. So you guys definitely don't want to miss that as well as other content. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support our work, links to that are in the description on Patreon. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you to both guests for joining me, and we'll see you in the next video. See you guys soon. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?